Richard Pryor is considered one of the greatest comedians of all time. He's on my Mount Rushmore, along with Cosby, Chappelle, and Louis. If you look at any stand-up comedian working today, traces of Richard Pryor can be found in their act. He was one of the first comedians to open himself up in front of a large audience and make his comedy personal. I do coke, I beat my women, shot up my car, and somehow we all understood where he was coming from. Pryor's vulnerability is what made his peers respect him. He revolutionized the genre of stand-up comedy. Richard Pryor is your favorite comedian's favorite comedian. As famous as Pryor became for his jokes, the demons he dealt with have also become widely publicized. The most famous incident being the time he set himself on fire.
Comedian Richard Pryor is in critical condition tonight and given less than a 50-50 chance of surviving after suffering third-degree burns over half of his body.
Police said Pryor was burned because some ether and cocaine he was using in his bedroom caught fire.
So the Comedy Hype team made a trip from our studios in Atlanta, Georgia to Los Angeles, California to visit the very home where it happened.
This is history, folks. Right here on this very street, then 39-year-old comedian Richard Pryor would find himself in flames on a summer night, June 9th, 1980. At the time, Richard Pryor was the biggest comedian in the world. Eddie Murphy had yet to make his debut on Saturday Night Live. The Cosby Show wouldn't premiere for another 4 years, so one black comedian at a time, this was Richard's time to shine. Richard and Rashawn were watching TV together. Rashawn would get up and go to the kitchen. When he returned, he saw a big ball of fire running towards him. What did he do? Moved out the way, as anyone would, of course.
Doctors thought Richard Pryor was going to die on that summer night in 1980. Pryor was fighting for his life when he poured 151 proof rum all over his body and flicked his lighter, which resulted in third-degree burns over more than half of his body. And for the longest time, people didn't know if this was a freebasing accident or if Richard Pryor actually tried to kill himself. According to the book Furious Cool, Richard Pryor and the World That Made Him, he began freebasing around November 1979. His addiction would continue to worsen, and by the springtime, he was unable to go 5 minutes without freebasing. An excerpt from Furious Cool details how Pryor would freebase. He would light the cotton swab and use that as a flame torch to light the pipe. Richard was dipping that cotton flame torch into the rum bottle 151 proof rum. Plus, he's high. He's out of his mind. And you know, after 3 days on a binge, or whatever it was, that's a pretty risky thing to do.
Right here is where the greatest comedians of all time lived at one point in his career, arguably at the height of his career. About the late 70s, Pryor purchased this house. On one night in June 1980, history would be made, and people will be talking about this forever. Probably one of the most notable events in Pryor's life, where he set himself on fire, jumped over this very fence, running for his life. Can you imagine what that feels like, running down this very street? If you were one of Pryor's neighbors and you saw a big ball of fire running down the street, what exactly would you do? They moved out the way. I probably would have done the same thing. Just to be in the actual space is very eye-opening, and I'm trying to put myself in Pryor's actual shoes. How far did he run? How long was, certain distances from the hospital, from the Christian school where he finally collapsed? Where exactly were the officers who caught up with him? I couldn't imagine running 5 feet on fire, nevertheless a couple miles. Even when he was on fire, police officers engaged, tried to help him. They didn't even know who this man was at the time. Honestly, this is not what I expected. When you think of where a celebrity lives, especially someone of Pryor's stature at the time, would have thought it would have been more like a Hidden Hills kind of thing, or Calabasas where the Kardashians live.
What do you think drove him to this to happen?
I think the pressures of fame, probably. Being at the top of the game, everyone's kind of praising you. And especially, we all know the trope of one black comedian at a time. Richard definitely felt that, especially, a couple years later when Eddie Murphy would come along. There's this famous story about Richard. He's saying a lot of people are calling Eddie Murphy the next Richard Pryor. That got to him because Pryor said he's not done being Richard Pryor, so how can there be a next one yet? Just shows all the expectations that fans and the public really put on all these celebrities and how it affects them in their daily lives. Richard Pryor was definitely an unhappy person. You all know he grew up in a brothel, experienced drugs and alcohol at a very early age, so him kind of numbing his pains with drugs, alcohol, escapism, definitely wasn't the right way to go, but now we all know about therapy, so. I wish you could see what the house actually looks like. We've got some scriptures from Pryor, who went in some of the different rooms in the house, you know, the swimming pool, the tennis courts, all of that. Yeah, I wish we got an exclusive look at the house, what it actually looks like.
According to the San Fernando Valley blog, the official address was 17267 Parthenia Street, 4 beds, 4 baths, and 5,759 square feet. Analysts predict that Pryor paid somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000 for the home. According to the same source, it was sold on April 6, 1989 to Stuart and Irene Boyd, a few years after Pryor was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. In 1994, Northridge was hit by an earthquake and the main house was destroyed. However, it was later rebuilt to match the style of the original. Pryor's time at his Parthenia Street address was filled with memories. One of Richard's daughters, Rain Pryor, recounted a memory of what life was like with her father in her 2009 autobiography, Jokes My Father Never Taught Me. Daddy bought a big house on Parthenia Street in Northridge, about 30 minutes from the old place, and took his entourage with him. I love that house even more than the one in the hills above Sunset, and for the next 8 years, till I was 13, it was home to me. When you arrived at Parthenia Street, you had to wait for the automatic gates to swing open. Then you made your way down a long driveway, through a sprawling citrus orchard, till the big ranch-style house came into view. It was a low, Spanish-style structure, built around a central courtyard, and you entered the house through a reed door that led to the kitchen, which was the heart of the house. According to Los Angeles Real Estate News, Pryor bought the property in 1974 and lived there for several years. He was able to make it all the way down the street before collapsing. It was officers Richard Zielinski and Carl Helm who were responding to a call before they saw Richard running down Parthenia Street just after 8 p.m. that evening.
Richard, we've got to get you to the hospital.
I'm going to the hospital. Just show me where.
Why don't you just stop and wait for the
If I stop, man, I'll die.
Pryor stopped for a moment in front of the San Fernando Valley Christian School, almost a mile from his house. Then he took off again towards Havenhurst Avenue, where an ambulance eventually caught up to him.
So now we're about 2 miles out from Richard Pryor's home on Parthenia Street. Now we're on Havenhurst Avenue, 2 miles away, where ambulances would catch up to Richard Pryor after he was on fire. They would put him out in flames, then take him to Sherman Oaks Hospital, another 5 miles away from here.
Pryor was then taken to Sherman Oaks Hospital, where he was expected to spend his last few hours alive. His entire upper body, torso, back, chest, arms, neck, and parts of his face were severely burned. Pryor was given a 1 in 3 chance of survival, but after 6 weeks of treatment, he was discharged from the hospital. When the news was released to the public, Pryor gave different accounts of how the fire started. Several friends and associates of Richard tried to look out for him, and in return, Richard covered for those who were covering for him. In a 1980 interview with Barbara Walters, Pryor claimed that the fire was an accident and he wasn't on drugs during the time of the fire. It wasn't until a follow-up 1986 interview where Pryor admitted that he had lied, and the fire was the cause of a weeks-long freebasing binge. Pryor confessed that this was no accident, and he really tried to kill himself.
I tried to commit suicide.
Intentionally?
That's all I want to say. Next question.
It didn't work.
Yes, it did.
You killed the old Richard Pryor?
Yeah, that person's dead.
After the tragic event, Richard discovered that his lawyer was stealing money from him. He was able to recover $1 million, but he still owed a share of money to the IRS. Red Fox knows about this. This led to the creation of Richard Pryor live on the Sunset Strip, filmed at the Hollywood Palladium in Los Angeles, California.
So we're now at the famous Hollywood Palladium where Richard Pryor would film Richard Pryor live on the Sunset Strip. Filmed it in December 1981, nearly a year and a half after the tragic incident of him setting himself on fire. Fans hadn't seen him in a while. It had been about 3 years since his last actual stand-up special, so people couldn't wait to see what Richard Pryor was going to say. Richard Pryor live on the Sunset Strip will go down as one of the top 10 comedy specials of all time. You knew what he was wearing, that red suit, very iconic. Even the jokes that he told, you know, him going to Africa for the first time, stop saying nigger, him making milk and cookies, who's that? Richard Pryor running down the street. Those bits are iconic, you can recite them and you already know what special that joke came from. Not a lot of comedians can say that they have a joke where you know exactly what he was wearing, exactly what the stand-up special was, and exactly what was going on at that time, which proves and adds to Pryor's legacy and his greatness. Now, when Richard Pryor filmed the special, he actually filmed 2 nights. First night, he bombed. Second night, he told everyone from the first night to come back, and Richard Pryor had a flawless show. The first time fans would hear from him in a year and a half. So right now, obviously live performances are shut down due to COVID, and have been for a very long time. So I'm pretty sure artists, fans alike are waiting to get back, even the audiences too. You know, they've been cooped up in the house for over a year. We want to get out to seeing live performances. So they're doing virtual shows right now with Pokemon and Post Malone. Don't know how that's going to work out. I'm not interested in that. There's nothing like a live performance, you know, especially coming from the artist's perspective. You know, feeding off the energy of the crowd. It's undescribable, but it's an art in itself. You know, stand-up comedians need the live audiences to feed off their energy, to know what jokes work and what jokes don't, to see what jokes have a certain reaction. We miss the people, I'm not gonna lie about that. You can't replicate stand-up in any other form, not virtual, not anything. There's nothing that can replace the live performance when it comes to stand-up comedy.
Richard Pryor changed the game of comedy the same way Magic Johnson changed the game of basketball. No matter what Richard was going through in his personal life, he still brought all those demons he was facing on stage for our enjoyment. Richard Pryor is always celebrated as one of the greatest and most influential stand-up comedians of all time. This is because he was transparent with his life and talked about everything he went through, including the time he set himself on fire.